Welcome to the Building Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Don Tarjanskis, and join us as we explore the world of construction. Each episode, we welcome a guest that shares career highlights and career advice, and hopefully inspires the next generation of construction professionals. Welcome to another episode of the Building Your Career podcast. Today, I am joined by Lee Dixon, who I've had the pleasure of working with before. But yeah, I think we'll start off where we always start off. Lee, if you could tell us a little bit more about your current job role, the company that you work for, and more importantly, the division that you work for as well.
Hi Don, thanks for having us. Appreciate it. So I work for McLaren Construction, one of the more well-known companies in the industry. Project director. So it's a full-on role, and even more so in the newly formed data center division. Currently working on a data center for a blue chip client in Peterborough. So it's very busy.
Okay, and just for some of our listeners who have only just kind of heard about the data center division, could you kind of just briefly explain exactly what a data center is and what a data center does as well?
Yeah, so I guess in the most simplistic terms, a data center is essentially a huge shed which houses lots of data racks, which process all the data that we use every day. So whether you're online, whether you're using cloud, card payments in a bank, surfing websites, all that data has to go through somewhere, and these huge data centers is what stores and processes all of that data. It's a huge business. They're flying up all over the place, and everybody seems to be keen to get into the market.
Okay, brilliant. So just to go on to our next question in terms of your personal story. So how did it all begin for you then? How did you first get into construction? Was it family ties, or how did you kind of start off your career then?
Yeah, so my dad was in the construction industry. My grandfather was in the construction industry. So yeah, I kind of knew where I was going. You get led up the garden path, so to speak. And I left school, and my dad was sort of like, "What are you going to do? You're going to come and do what me and your granddad do." They were both joiners at the time, carpenter and joiners. So didn't really have that much of an interest in it. But when you leave school at 16, what will I do? Do you want to get paid to do an apprenticeship? Yeah, that'll do. So that's kind of how it started. Done my apprenticeship in joinery, and obviously as you go out and you do day release or week release or however it's set up, you're out on sites, you see how things are operating, and it was kind of instantaneous that principal contracting, main contracting side of construction is where I would see myself. So I started making avenues towards that side of it rather than being on the tools. And then, I finished my apprenticeship, and then I stayed on to do an extra year in construction management, and was very lucky to get an opportunity as an assistant site manager off the back of that, and kind of went from there, really. I guess one thing I like about my career is I've pretty much done every role up to the point of where I am now. So, you understand the challenges people are facing in those roles, and it's a lot better to be able to manage that and sort of preempt the kind of problems that's going to come up. But I guess my passion for construction is massively grown. It's pretty much all I know. So the tools is definitely not for me. I'm not going to lie. Some people love that side of things, but people ask, do I have a trade? And I say, well, kind of. I've never touched any carpentry tools since the last day of my apprenticeship. So I'm a fully qualified desk jockey now.
And I think, that's one thing that comes up time and time again on this podcast is trying to learn all the different aspects of construction. And one thing that the trainees were saying to me when I had them on the podcast was, just try and learn as much as possible at the beginning. So could you kind of talk us through the different roles that you've had and what you kind of learned along the way in terms of construction, not just being about the finished product and building things that are the finished article?
Yeah, so I think that's something that's really important for people coming through as well, because stereotypically people will think of construction as the bricks and mortar, the plumbers, the electricians, that sort of thing. But there's such a vast array of opportunities within that that I think if more people knew about that, I think we'd get a lot more interest in them sort of roles. So
Definitely.
and it's not until I became to work for a main contractor that you start getting exposed to those other roles, such as, planning. I didn't know there was somebody who manages a program and goes through all of that sort of stuff. Design managers, commercial managers, QSs, and then all of your senior site managers, project managers, and they all have a role to play in at the end of the day, making sure that a project gets delivered on time and is profitable at the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, I started out literally from the basics. So as assistant site manager, reviewing RAMs, you're at the focal point of the subcontractor on site. And then, yeah, I literally moved from every step. So assistant site manager to site manager, then senior site manager. I spent quite a lot of time there at that role because there's quite a big transition from going to senior site manager into project management. It's quite a big step. And then I furthered my education through that process as well. So I was lucky enough to go through my HNC, H&D, and don't have any debt out the back of it. So that's always a bonus as well. And yeah, I'm quite an ambitious person, so I always knew where I wanted to go to. And you just got to go out and create opportunities for yourself to learn as much as you possibly can and have the confidence to take the next step and be confident in your abilities to be able to deliver.
Definitely, and it seems like you kind of progressed through the ranks kind of quite naturally as well, and you knew exactly where you wanted to go, which leads really nicely onto our next question. If you could turn back the hands of time, speak to your younger self, and give yourself one piece of advice when you first started out in construction, what advice would you give?
So for me, looking back, I wish I'd done a lot more research and due diligence on the companies that I wanted to work for. So I know it's very hard when you're young to pick what kind of sector you want to work in, but I would certainly, I wish I'd picked a contractor that did a lot more of a diverse set of industries, from commercial, residential, data centers. The route I went down was very, very much one-sided. It was all pretty much retail and commercial. So, and then once you're in there, you kind of get hooked on it, and it's very big to try and change from what you know. So, yeah, I would say do your research. Go somewhere that's very diverse and has a lot of different avenues to go down, because at the end of the day, companies love loyalty. If you can stay loyal to a company, you will be rewarded for it, especially nowadays. And if you can stay in that company and explore different avenues of construction and even roles, and to a certain extent, then it's win-win, really.
And yeah, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there, really, because construction companies are looking for that longevity and for people to commit with the business and grow with the business as well. But, more importantly, it's not just about looking out your window and seeing, okay, well, the only construction that's going on is what I can see, and that might be residential. There's just so much more to the industry than that. So don't just think that it's only the stuff that you can see. There's a lot of buildings going on that are just off the beaten track, or you simply can't see or won't know about. So go and explore. Be inquisitive. There's lots of stuff out there for you. And as we had the trainees on saying about the websites that you can go on, look on LinkedIn pages, just be inquisitive and get out there and start learning.
Yeah. LinkedIn is huge. It's come leaps and bounds recently. It's the first place I go if I want to find out what somebody's doing, or who's been awarded a contract, or what a particular company's getting into. You can go on the LinkedIn, and they want to advertise it. They want to share with the world what they're doing. So it's a great place for people to go and find that stuff out. And you know what? Even just ringing the companies up, most of them have a learning and development department now, so they'll be more than happy to speak to you and explain what they can do and what they can offer. And I think, if anything, it's never going to go against you for doing that. People are always going to like somebody who's actually reaching out and being inquisitive about something. So yeah, I would definitely urge people to do that.
Are you a job seeker, tired of endlessly scrolling through job boards with no success? Has your job search hit a dead end? Well, we're here to tell you there's another way. Here at Quest Personnel, we offer a variety of free resources to help job seekers just like you. Our team of expert recruiters is here to help you through every step of the job search process, from CV writing to interview techniques. But that's not all. We also offer exclusive access to workshops, networking events, and other job roles that you simply won't find anywhere else. So what are you waiting for? Get in touch now on our website, questpersonnel.co.uk. Brilliant. And you kind of touched on it briefly before in terms of day release and different avenues available. So in your opinion, kind of how important is the kind of education and qualification route, or what are the different options available to people who are either youngsters just starting out in the industry, or maybe someone who's a little later on in their career who just wants a kind of a complete career change. So what, in your opinion, what are the options that are available to them?
I mean, the options now are so much better than when they were, when I was 16 and looking for an apprenticeship. It was very black and white. You either done an apprenticeship in a trade or that was it. I mean, now you have degree apprenticeships, which I think are one of the most brilliant things you could do because you're being paid to learn. You get your degree out at the end of it, and you're not faced with the debt either, which is,
Yeah.
I think, what puts a lot of people off going down that route. In all honesty, I'm always going to be biased towards the route that I took because I think just generally in how that affects the day to day running of a project, you understand the problems that everyone faces because you've been there and done that job. But that's not to say there isn't a route. There's a traditional route where you go to university and typically study construction management or design or electrical engineering, and then you come out of that and then you start looking for a job. But now there's, McLaren, for example, we offer an apprenticeship which you come in and it's kind of a general apprenticeship, and you will go around and spend 3 or 6 months with every division within the business. And then at
Okay.
the end of that, you can then make a decision on what you like. So you don't have to make that decision in the beginning. You don't have to say, okay, I'm going to start a commercial apprenticeship, and then 6 months in you go, well, actually, it's not really for me. You get to experience all of the divisions, and then you can choose what you want to specialise in. So I think that's really, really good, and certainly not something that was offered to me when I was younger. So I think a lot of work's being done on enticing people into the industry and making it as easy as possible for them. And I guess we've just got to roll with that. And the more businesses get involved with that and advertise it to people, I think it can only do us good things.
Definitely. And I think that's great for McLaren as well. And not that many companies are actually doing that, is that when people are coming in, just give them the option to work on and see where they're best fit. I remember one of our guests saying, find out what people's genuine interests are, find out what motivates them and makes them tick, and run
Yeah.
with that. So, you're giving the trainees, the youngsters, or anyone looking to get involved, the option to find out what is in their interests, because sometimes you might be involved in one type of thing and you might be for you, but you just stick it out for years and years and years, and then all of a sudden you've kind of pigeonholed yourself in that particular sector or that particular job role. So I think that's excellent what they're doing at the moment.
It's so common as well. You speak to so many people who are in a role, and you say, "Well, how do you get into that role?" And they kind of, "Well, I just kind of fell in it and went with it." And they're probably not necessarily as passionate about it as they were if they'd been given the option to do something else. And you do get people who, they'll do 10 years as a QS and go, "Well, actually, no, I don't want to sit behind a desk anymore. I want to get out on the ground and make a change." And fair play to them for doing it. And again, if you're in a good company with a good learning development department, they'll help you do that because if you've dedicated however many years to them and you want to diversify and learn some new things, then it's only going to benefit them in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing that is kind of a common thread here is just to ask questions as well. Don't be afraid to ask questions and ask what people do, how they go about doing it, just to learn. Because I think that's one of the myths that we're trying to dispel here, is that everyone in the construction industry really wants to help each other out, and they will have the time of day for you. If it's not now, just grab them 5 minutes on a lunch break and just ask them. Everyone is willing to give you the information. It's not how people think, where everyone's just like, oh, I don't have time for that anymore. Ask the questions, learn from your people around you and learn from others, because everyone's trying to help each other out in this industry and day and age. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good point there.
Yeah, totally agree. It is, and from me leading a project, if I'm leading by example and I'm approachable and I'm open to people coming and asking questions, other people see that, and it creates that sort of environment, and that's what it's about. And there's a lot to be said about creating an environment that motivates people and is open for people to learn and develop themselves. So yeah, I think times have definitely changed from what people's probably prehistoric ideas of construction are, for sure.
Good. Just on that as well, what do you consider to be, or is there any kind of common myths that you've come up against all the time when people are considering maybe getting into construction? And is there any kind of, can you dispel any of the myths that you find to be quite common when people are speaking to you?
Yeah, so the biggest one we hear is always so the main contractor typically, we're employed by the client. It's our job to deliver the project, and we hire in subcontractors to deliver the physical work. So we manage it. That's essentially what we do in a nutshell. And there's always a very competitive nature between the subcontractors and the main contractors, and you'll always hear subcontractors going, "Oh, I can never do a main contractor job," and they're the enemy and that sort of thing. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because we can't work without each other, and it's all about building those relationships. And if you can get those relationships right, then the world's your oyster. At the end of the day, you can make anything happen, and that's what this industry is about, with ever increasing program deadlines, budget cuts, and people not wanting to spend as much money. You have to look at efficiencies, and the only way you can do that is building those relationships and make sure that you maintain them throughout. So I think that's probably the biggest one that is definitely a myth.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's very, very important. If you've got everyone on board on a project and everyone's working together and everyone's working for the good of the project, that's the ideal scenario, really. But just leading on to our final question as well. So this is more for our kind of maybe senior management listeners or particularly directors that listen in. What can the industry do as a whole, or what can the management do as a whole to kind of attract and also retain and keep that younger talent in the business, in your opinion?
Yeah, so retention is a huge issue in the construction industry. People, it's so easy to move around that people do it, and there's a lot of companies sort of go out of the way to retain people. And I think the basis of that is understanding your employees in what they want to do. If you've got a motivated employee who feels valued in what they do, then 9 times out of 10 they're going to stay there because they feel rewarded for the hard work that they put in. And again, McLaren, I've been at McLaren just nearly 18 months now, and it's one of the best companies that I've seen for learning and development. You get an annual training schedule, which is everything mapped out from what you need to be able to do your job and what you need to develop, and that is all mapped out for you throughout the year. And it's really, really good, and something that I've definitely been keen to push with the rest of the team. My team on this project's fairly new. Some of them are very junior and they haven't had a lot of experience in data centers. So again, harnessing that enthusiasm to learn and make sure that we filter it through the right departments, i.e. learning and development, and getting them the courses. And it's not even, it doesn't even have to be a degree course or an apprenticeship or anything official. There's thousands of different courses out there. A lot of them are on a development hub, which we have, which you can go on, the like 20-minute bite-sized pieces of training videos which you can watch. But yeah, I think that sort of thing is probably the main thing that would retain people. But it for me, it's really simple. If you can keep somebody motivated and reward them and recognize what they do, then you have them for as long as you need them. I think people get a lot complicated into how we can do this, and I do really think it is simple to retain people. Getting people into the industry is probably a little bit more difficult. I think there's a lot of stereotypes that need to be broken down and myth busted. And I think things like this, the podcast you're doing, I think is absolutely fantastic way of doing it, and hopefully highlights from people actually working in the industry what the reality of it is. And yeah, I guess it's down to the big leaders in the industry, all these tier one contractors, to go out there and use the resource that they have to get in there. I've heard in your podcast before about the shortage in the construction industry, the perceived requirements between now and 2027, and it's huge. It's mammoth, and if the big players don't play their part in trying to encourage people in the industry, then we're going to be in a difficult position.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what we're kind of trying to do with the podcast as well, is just reach out to as many people as possible, speak to the industry experts. And, it was great to have the trainees on the podcast talking about their story as well. But I think you touched on a really important point there with McLaren, is that, the career progression is laid out in front of you for when you join, because I know a lot of the listeners are a little bit frustrated that maybe they've come into a company, they've been there for a year or so, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of sit down about career progression, or they're not too sure where they just don't want to stay at trainee forever, and then not too sure what the progression is. So that's great that it's actually in black and white and there in front of you as well. So yeah, well done, McLaren, for that.
No, well, it is. McLaren as a business is brilliant, but it definitely comes down to the individuals leading as well. You have to, because it's a very busy environment. We've got a lot of pressures. We have to deliver a project, and sometimes that sort of thing falls by the wayside. But at the end of the day, I'm very passionate about motivating the team and making sure that they get what they need to keep them energized, because if they're motivated out there doing what we need to do, then it makes my life easier. So, yeah, I guess it's down to the senior management to recognise that and push it through sort of thing.
Definitely. Well, Lee, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the pod. Some really good advice there for people just starting out. So thank you so much for being a guest.
Thanks for having us, Don. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Building Your Career podcast. We hope you enjoyed hearing from our guest and learning about the different career paths available. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe so we can reach even more listeners. And if anyone wants any free CV advice or simply wants to know the options available to them, don't hesitate to get in touch.